Daniel Payne. Daniel Payne. Man, oh man, oh man. What can you say about Daniel Payne? I'm excited to teach you guys about Daniel Payne. I'm really excited about this guy. I hope you guys listen closely, and I hope you're as amped up as I am once you see why I would want to introduce him to you. Okay, so here we go with Daniel Payne. I was born in 1811 and died in 1893. And he was actually born to free black parents in Charleston, South Carolina. But his father, London, died when Daniel was only 4 years old. And his mother, Martha, died when Daniel was only 9 years old. So, Daniel Payne was raised by his grandmother. He became an apprentice, and for folks who worked in the shoe business, carpenters, and tailors even for a while. And here's what's crazy. He read a biography of a Scottish Presbyterian, so a white minister. And here's what's cool. Black folks for a long time have been free and okay to read biographies of churchmen and churchwomen who are white and been like, wow, look at the Wesleys and look at Calvin and Spurgeon and praise God for David Livingston and all that stuff. Let's return the favor, you know what I'm saying? If you're sort of on the other side, are you okay to have black heroes? And, I don't mean to be... Let's have some black heroes besides some of the ones that the media puts on our face. I'll just put it that way. Let's have some different ones. And I have no problem having black heroes. I think that's a good thing, is to have a great many diverse types of heroes from across the spectrum of the body. And to know them. And here's what's cool. So he read this biography of a Scottish Presbyterian minister who had taught himself the biblical languages, autodidactic learning to learn the biblical languages. And you know what Daniel Payne said? He said, you know what? Because he was a rather studious young man. If this guy could do it, so can I. So he had a vociferous appetite when it came to books and learning. And he got his hands on whatever he could, kind of like someone I know named Bookworm. You know what I'm talking about. And listen to this. He taught himself Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Daniel Payne taught himself Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Now, I've taken first year Greek, and every now and then I try to catch up on it, right? And there's some tricky aspects to it, right? It's not English. And then my friends who've got into Hebrew, boy, oh boy, oh boy. That's all another level, the Hebrew. And then Latin. My kids were homeschooled for a while, and they were learning Latin. Interesting language. Well, he taught himself all three. That's my point. Converted at 18 years old, and then after he felt a special call in his life, a specific call, in fact. And I want to read this quote from Daniel Payne. Well, actually, guys, it's going to be more than 3 languages. You'll see here in a second later on, but it's 3 as of now. And when he was 18, he felt a call to ministry. And here's what he says. This is a quote from Daniel Payne. I felt as if the hands of a man were pressing my 2 shoulders, and a voice speaking within my soul, saying, I have set thee apart to educate thyself, in order that thou mayest be an educator to thy people. End quote. Now, he says it was a voice speaking within his soul, so he's not saying he heard the audible voice of God, although, I'm not tripping on that. But it's funny, God always speaks in the King James Version English. I mean, that's okay. God speaks in it's all good. But the point is, a special call to get himself educated in order to educate other people. Again, my point, this guy, his whole driving passion was directly born out of his passion for Christian ministry and obedience to God, not something else. That's what motivated him. So what did he do? He also taught himself French, because in 1829, at the age of 19 years old, Daniel Payne opened and operated a school for slave and free Africans in South Carolina, with only 6 students, though. Yeah, good point. It's not like he had the privileges we have today, and especially being a black person in that society. But even still, you didn't have the access to languages and Rosetta Stone and all that stuff. Now, he had to do a lot of the teaching himself, and he had young students and older folks as well. And I thought this was so amazing. He was a smaller man. He was never very physically strong, but he was also hands-on. Listen to this, because apparently they studied science and they studied they studied biology up close and personal. Listen to this quote about what he did with the students. I bought a live alligator, made one of my pupils provoke him to bite, and whenever he opened his mouth, I discharged a load of shot from a small pistol down his throat. Not the student, the alligator, by the way. As soon as he was stunned, I threw him on his back, cut his throat, ripped his chest, hung him up, and studied his viscera till they ceased to move. So imagine being in Daniel Payne's school, one of the few places you could get educated if you're black, right? In South Carolina. He buys a live alligator. Oh, check it out. We bought a live alligator. And then imagine being the student who got this job. Was it like this? Hey, I'll do it. You know what I'm saying? Was it like that? Was there some wild kid who wanted to be involved with this? Or was it like the kid who didn't pay his tuition that month? You know what I mean? You're going to provoke the alligator to bite. So then the alligator opens his mouth. Daniel Payne, this is in like science class, right? It's biology. Shoots the alligator in the mouth, right? And then the alligator's like, so he's not dead. Flips over the alligator, cut his throat, ripped his chest, hung him up. And imagine the students sitting there watching their teacher do this. Like, yeah, I mean, imagine seeing this, right? We see. Dawn probably knows with all of her training. She probably didn't have to look it up. Internal organs, intestines, small and large. And Mary, the internal organs and the main cavities of the body. Yeah, so checking all that stuff while it's moving. So this is a hands-on learning here, Daniel Payne, right? He doesn't look like he could pull that off, does he? Look at him, but don't let him fool you. So, on to sad news in a second here. Listen to this. This school grew to 60 students. And Daniel Payne's not doing this to be rich, right? He's doing this because he felt he had a special call from God. This is civil rights, this education. It grew to 60 students, which became the city's largest school for black folks. Guess what happened? In 1834, a law came out that forbid anyone to teach a slave to read or write. So what did the city do? Actually, the state, I'm sorry. Hey, 1834, you can't teach a slave to read or write. Now, again, is this encouraging people to learn how to read the Bible and think on their own and to become Christians? No. They didn't want that. They didn't want slaves reading the Bible. Except for a few passages you could take out of context. You know what I mean? Not only that, not only was it so bad with this law that you couldn't teach a slave to read or write, free black people could not even teach other free black people. So Daniel Payne was free. He wasn't even allowed to teach other free black people. See that? Now listen to this unfair and unjust law. This kind of stuff makes your blood boil. If you were a white man and taught a slave to read or write, here is your penalty. 6 months prison and an $100 fine. If you were black, the penalty was $50 fine and 50 lashes. So you could be a free black man who, if you taught another free black man or woman to read or write, $50 fine and 50 lashes. So in 1835, this new law by the South Carolina General Assembly forced the school to close. Daniel Payne, he was heartbroken. He moved to New York, and then he presented himself with letters to Methodist, Episcopalians, and congregational clergy. And guess what they told him when he broke down his vision? He broke down his vision about educating black folks to understand Christianity and all that. Members from 3 different denominations told him, go to Africa. Meaning, don't teach the black folks all up in here how to do that kind of stuff. Go to Africa and teach them. That's not a threat to our power structure. This is in New York. Methodist, Episcopalian, Congregational, go to Africa, Daniel Payne. Teach them over there. Don't teach the black folks here in America. But there was a Lutheran minister. I want to know who this guy is. I want to meet this guy. I want to meet Daniel Payne, but I like this next guy. He was impressed with Daniel Payne. I mean, how impressive is Daniel Payne anyway? Clearly impressive. He helped him get sponsored to go to Gettysburg Theological Seminary. Now, the thing with Daniel Payne, he wasn't happy about this. You may think, oh, wow, Daniel Payne didn't want to get educated anymore. Not that he didn't care about that. He wanted to educate others. That was what he was all about. But the Lutheran guy convinced him, and Daniel Payne was a certain place in his life, and plus he was being sponsored. So he went to Gettysburg Theological Seminary there in Pennsylvania. He was licensed at 26-year-old by a Lutheran synod. Look how young this guy is and how accomplished. This is amazing. I mean, who's open to school at 19 years old, right? Hey, what's up, Douglas Reed? Good to see you, bro. This is amazing. Now, he took a Presbyterian church in New York in 1837, but he dedicated himself so much to preaching the word and counseling people that he lost his voice. He strained it too much, and he lost it for a year. His voice was essentially gone for a year due to overextending himself. This is a man of the people, right? And he had a sickness that struck him that kept him in bed for 6 months. So he resigned because he realized he couldn't really do his job in those conditions. He was an overall physically frail man, which makes the alligator story all the more impressive. Then he joined something called the AME. We're going to talk a little bit about that later with our next 2 men we're going to cover. But he joined the AME in 1841 after initially being skeptical, and he served at Washington, D.C. church there. Now listen to this. Daniel Payne, and you've seen his bio so far, he had to deposit $1,000 to Washington, D.C. to guarantee his good behavior there. These laws were becoming more and more common in America. Ohio had one for $500. These kind of laws caused a lot of black folks to go to Canada because they were being enacted in the North. And what it was is, you get into an apartment or something, you're a renter, and you got like a, clean, what is it? I forget what it's called, but like, hey, if you keep this joint clean, get your money back later, right? That kind of deposit. So supposedly, I guess you're supposed to get your money back later. I don't know if that ever happened, whatever. If you're well-behaved. They didn't make white folks do this. But he had to do that. Imagine how humiliating that would be. Then in 1844 and 1845, Daniel Payne wrote 5 epistles on the education of the ministry. So as he saw the AME ministers, he, being a man of education, was concerned about proper training in the pastorate by the AME ministers. It was a brand new denomination, young, learning. Yeah, security deposit. Thank you, Elena. What's wrong with me? Yeah, of course. What's wrong with me? Thank you. You guys are the best, by the way. So he wrote these, and he was willing to be very critical of pastors who he felt acted in ignorance and taught in ignorance, right? He cared about people being good shepherds, and so he criticized those who he felt weren't. 1852, he was elected a bishop in AME, and this is the name he became known by: Apostle of Education to the Negro, as well as the Apostle to Educators in the AME Church. Now, let me tell you a little story here about Daniel Payne. I got this from this book right here, so I'm giving you the source. Giving you the source here. Free Indeed, good book, expanded edition. I like this. Written by Mark Sidwell. All right. And listen to this story. This is powerful. This is a test he faced when he was a pastor. All right. Well, not a pastor, but working in leadership in a church there in Philadelphia. So he's a bishop, though, in the AME church. He says, listen to this. It's 1853, and there's a woman there in Philadelphia who did something good that was made PAYNE happy, of course. She opened a school to educate black folks, right? Something that was close to PAYNE's heart. Well, what happened to this woman? She was a white woman, remember? Other white folks clearly shunned her. So basically, she wasn't really welcome in any white churches. Imagine, how messed up is that? This is Philadelphia, by the way. Philadelphia. This isn't Birmingham. In Philadelphia, if you opened up a school to teach black kids, you'd be shunned by white churches. Do you guys... what is... In 1853. So... What did she do? She began worshiping at an AME church. Whoever this lady is, she's cool too. Sure. First of all, she opens a school. Second of all, she's like, okay, you guys you're not gonna have me there. Well, I'll go to a black church then. A lot of white folks won't even go to a black church now. I'm just saying. But what happened? Now you can imagine this. Okay, put yourself in the other folks' shoes. There were some ladies there who were at the church who weren't really feeling a white lady coming in. You know, we get enough of them during the week. You know, they asked the pastor to expel the lady because she was a white lady. And the pastor didn't want to do this at first, right? But families threatened to withhold their offerings to the church and to starve out the bishop and the pastor if they did not agree. So we ain't going to give our offering money no more, and you and Bishop PAYNE are going to starve to death. Well, Daniel PAYNE stood firm. We're not going to kick out a white lady due to pressure. This is not right. But the pastor gave in and he kicked the woman out of the church. Now, I don't know where that lady ended up going, right? Now, afterwards, Bishop PAYNE kind of went up the ranks further, the AME denomination, which, again, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in these next two folks. Well, guess what? This same pastor that ended up expelling the white lady later on wanted an appointment at another church. And Bishop PAYNE used his authority in the AME to deny the pastor the appointment. This infuriated this pastor. He confronted Daniel PAYNE. In the account says he shook his fist at him and he said, "You dare to leave me without an appointment on account of that white woman?" So again, you can understand why someone would be upset and feel this way. I'm not saying it's okay or good or godly, but you can at least understand it, right? And then listen to what this pastor said to Daniel PAYNE. "Open your mouth if you dare, and I will lay you flat upon the floor." Now, I think Daniel PAYNE knew from his days of shooting alligators, you don't open your mouth in these kind of confrontations. But the pastor ended up leaving in a rage, right? PAYNE would not revoke his decision, though. Listen to this quote. This is a beautiful quote by Daniel PAYNE. "I believe the pastor who would turn away from God's sanctuary any human being on the account of color was not fit to have charge of a gang of dogs." Listen to PAYNE. So see, these are civil rights advocates. But just because you love your kinsmen according to the flesh doesn't mean you hate other people. And I think people need to get that in their heads. Paul loved his kinsmen according to the flesh. Doesn't mean he hated Gentiles, does it? Daniel PAYNE loved his kinsmen according to the flesh, right? But he didn't hate white folks. In fact, look at this. He went to bat for this lady. And, causing some problems. But I like what he said there. And what if the white pastors of the day would have listened to this? "I believe the pastor who would turn away from God's sanctuary any human being on account of color was not fit to have charge of a gang of dogs." Amen, brother Daniel PAYNE. He worked hard on behalf of abolition. That's getting rid of slavery, 100%. And in fact, he even led a committee helping runaway slaves. And not only did he help run a committee helping to help runaway slaves get up to Canada and stuff like that, he and his wife operated a stop on the Underground Railroad. This man put his whole life on the line for what he believed in because of the gospel. At an 1839 address in a Lutheran synod meeting, he urged the Lutherans to adopt a report condemning slavery. So he's working tirelessly on civil rights in all sectors of society, right? This is a complete package man. Listen to what he says here. He argued in a beautiful way against slavery. Listen to this, quote, "American slavery," I like how he noted, that's interesting too, American slavery, which was a particular form of slavery, different than even Greco-Roman slavery. "American slavery brutalizes man, destroys his moral agency, and subverts the moral government of God." So, for example, a man is called a buck or something, treated like an animal, and he's forced to breed with another slave woman to produce the best offspring for slaves. Even if he's married to someone else, he'd be forced to do this. You see how it destroys a man's moral agency? Subverts the moral government of God. They would rip a husband and wife away if they had to sell one. They would rip a child away from his mother, making him automatically an orphan in slavery if they had to sell somebody. This subverts the moral government of God, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Now, continue on with the quote here. I oppose slavery, not because it enslaves the black man, but because it enslaves man. See that? It enslaves all men, the person who's a slave, and it enslaves even the slaveholder to sin and to be part of something like that. He had a broad moral vision. And were all the slaveholders in this land men of color, and the slaves white men, I would be as thorough and uncompromising an abolitionist as I now am, end quote. Hear that? He's saying, hey, if everybody who was a slaveholder in America was someone of color and all the slaves were white people, I'd still be an abolitionist. And we can see by the way he responded in other situations that it's no joke that that's true. Now, continuing on with his reasons against slavery, listen to this. This is a quote. Thus saith the Son of God, search the scriptures. So he's saying, remember when Jesus said search the scriptures? That's a command, basically, right? Search the scriptures. Does not slavery seal up the word of God and make it criminal for the slaves to read it? Hear what he's saying? He's saying you can't obey Jesus' command and exhortation to search the scriptures because they are being kept from even being able to read, including the Bible. And they can't be taught the Bible. Do you see? This is a powerful moral argument he's making to the Christian conscience. Would that the church would have listened to him sooner. Continuing on, he started relaying anecdotes and stories about this. He spoke about a slave who was licensed to preach by the Methodist Church and had a ministry on the plantations, right? Patrol came. A patrol? What do you mean a patrol? There's actually patrols who go around to make sure that the slaves weren't being taught and having meetings and all this stuff, and and they would actually patrol the plantations and stuff. And they came and they broke this meeting up. Somehow they heard about it. Probably someone sold them out. And this is a quote from PAYNE. They whipped him, this is the minister, in the most cruel manner and compelled him to promise that he would never return again to preach to those slaves, end quote. So he gives us an example of how evil slavery is. Now, why would someone, especially who says they're a Christian, or anyone, why would they? It's because their concern is their pocketbook. They want controllable slaves, teaching them to read in the scripture with this key story of Exodus and freedom in Christ doesn't work with that. PAYNE himself even actually joined a group of black. Listen, I just got to stop. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. This is why we're doing this. This needs to be done. Listen to this, okay? Please listen. If you haven't been listening, listen to this. Everyone listen closely. PAYNE was part of a group of black pastors and preachers who would do what? Preach the gospel to who? Poor white farmers. This man was such a man of God. He also had a ministry to poor whites who had never heard the gospel before. And they were ministering to these poor white farmers for 4 Sundays in a row, and PAYNE reports that they had seen some fruit. Most wonderful of all was a sick farmer who had found Christ due to the preaching of PAYNE and his black compatriots right before he died. Guess what happened? The patrols came around and forbid these free black men to preach the gospel even to poor whites. They wanted no way in which anyone who was not white would be elevated or taught or instructing someone who was white, no matter who had more education. See what I'm saying? PAYNE also reported during this talk, he said he was even in a meeting a few days before, and he was talking to a runaway slave who was staying with him, and he asked this man, are you a Christian? I like PAYNE. He's not just going to let you stay in his house as you escape to freedom. He's not going to let you just stay there without asking you a gospel question. Meaning he's going to help save you, get to freedom, but he's going to witness to you too. He says to this man, are you a Christian? To this runaway slave. And listen to this response. No, sir. White men treat us so bad in Mississippi that we can't be Christians. So again, this does away with a lot of the trope idea of slavery was beat into black folks. They were Christians despite in spite of a lot of the treatment of the slave owners and slaveholders. They didn't want educated folks learning Christianity. In fact, there was even, we're going to say, a trope among the slavers that if a slave became a Christian, they became worse slaves. So Daniel Payne in 1862, April was a month specifically, made an appointment and got it with Abraham Lincoln. So he was politically involved. Why did he do this? Why did he end up being able to meet with Lincoln? He urged him not to veto a bill which would outlaw slavery in D.C. There has been a bill that had been passed, and the question was he going to sign it or veto it? And Payne met with him, do not veto this bill that's going to outlaw slavery in D.C. By God's grace, Lincoln signed this bill 5 days later. And then later on in the 1860s, Payne was involved with something called Wilberforce, an amazing college in Ohio. I've actually seen it. It's a very interesting place. But this is a place where you get educated. It was integrated, all kinds of things. Just look up Wilberforce College. Man, I cannot speak today. I'm not going to say that word again. Wilberforce in Ohio. But in 1865, guess what happened? An arsonist burnt the main buildings to the ground. So he tried to set up a school. They shut it down. They burn it down. I mean, this is a tough life, right? But they held classes in a cottage while they were rebuilding. I love the resilience of Daniel Payne and those around him. They held classes in a cottage at Wilberforce until they rebuilt. And it took all the way to 1876. And he retired as president of Wilberforce. And that campus became site of something called PAYNE Theological Seminary. Now, I don't know if it's still around. Someone look that up, actually. Can someone look up PAYNE, PAYNE Theological Seminary? Somebody look that up. Let me know if it's still around. I hope it's not some liberal school. I hope it's still around. Anyway, someone look that up, though. And listen to I'm gonna get in with 2 quotes as far as Payne goes. This is beautiful. Christianity, this is a quote, is an educating power. It educates in every direction that touches humanity, not religiously only, but morally also. Not morally only, but intellectually also. Not intellectually only, but because it is a religious, moral, and intellectual educational power, it logically affects and modifies all the forms of civil and political life. You hear that? He's saying that's the effect Christianity has upon people and humans. So it's the opposite of, embrace ignorance and darkness. This is the whole reason why he who he was. And notice how the gospel, in his mind, which is accurate, touches on every area of life. It logically affects and modifies, all the forms of civil and political life. That's beautiful. I end with this quote. This is from an ordination sermon he was giving for new AME bishops. And I like what he did. He pointed to the model of Christ for ministers needing to be trained. Listen to what he said here. Our Lord and Master Jesus Christ the righteous, his head was all knowledge, and his heart all holiness. He was as free from ignorance as he was free from sin. God grant that we may all could be like him, as much in the one case as in the other. See what he's saying there? Daniel Payne. You can read his 1839 address, Slavery Brutalizes Man, at the link there on the card. And just to recap, born in 1811, died in 1893, educator, pastor, abolitionist, first black American president of a black college, free-born in Charleston, South Carolina, master math in 3 languages, later on 4. I forgot to mention the part about mastering math. Driven from South Carolina specifically by legislation prohibiting educating black folks. Moved north, attended seminary, became African Methodist Episcopal pastor and bishop. Helped found Wilberforce University, and he was an abolition advocate. Man, oh man, oh man.